Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Doug Boynton. In this week's program, WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh reports that the Marines are undergoing barracks inspections after complaints of subpar conditions. We'll learn the latest on Virginia's marijuana legislation, and there's a large debate raging over a small fish. We'll take you inside the decades-long dispute over Menhaden.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. Well, I've amended that. When it comes to Menhaden, particularly in Virginia, it's an ultra marathon, not just a marathon.
It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. The Marines are ordering force-wide inspection of all barracks. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh reports Hampton Roads and Camp Lejeune in North Carolina are on the list as the Marines respond to complaints of substandard conditions.
The Marines rolled out a plan to inspect all barracks throughout the Corps by March 15. A study released in September says at least 17,000 junior Marines live in substandard barracks throughout the force. Unaccompanied housing is typically reserved for younger unmarried Marines. Sergeant Major Jason Hammock says the Marines have housing that's not being used.
The inspections are going to identify where we can move Marines now, improving the occupancy of the good barracks and get them out of the bad barracks that we don't necessarily need.
Eventually, older barracks will be shuttered, including at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Roughly 3,000 Marines are assigned to facilities in Hampton Roads. Some live in Navy housing, but the Marines operate their own facilities inside Dam Neck Naval Base and at other installations in the region. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
A court ruled this week that a lawsuit challenging Virginia's removal from a regional carbon market can continue. WHRO's Catherine Hafner reported the details.
Environmental groups sued Virginia's Air Board last summer after regulators voted to leave the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI. The program makes power plant owners pay the state for their carbon dioxide emissions. The lawsuit says that because state lawmakers originally voted to join RGGI, it's illegal to remove Virginia from it without approval from the legislature. A judge previously dismissed some of the environmental groups from the suit, but this week Floyd County's Circuit Court ruled that one has standing to proceed. That's the Association of Energy Conservation Professionals. It contracts with an energy efficiency program funded by the money Virginia earns from RGGI. The court is now weighing whether to suspend the state's departure from RGGI while the lawsuit plays out. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
The Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO published a story this morning about Virginia's failure to stop police officers from jumping to another job after committing misconduct. 3 years after the legislature passed a bill requiring departments to complete internal reviews and provide records of misconduct to prospective employers, little has changed. VCIJ senior editor Lou Hansen sat down with reporter Sam Stecklow to discuss the reporting process for this story.
Hi, I'm Lou Hansen, editor with the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO.
My name is Sam Stecklow. I'm a journalist and Freedom of Information Fellow with the Invisible Institute. We're a nonprofit journalistic production company based in Chicago.
Tell me a little bit about how you got interested in the issue of wandering cops. And what are they? What's the concern about them?
So wandering cops have been something that has been kind of known in policing and, some aspects of journalism or policy for a while, but it really kind of became a bigger issue and a more widely known issue in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd and the publication of a law review article called The Wandering Officer that really delved into data from one state and showed that officers who had been fired were more likely to get fired and more likely to have sustained moral conduct complaints at new departments. And so they were really bringing the misconduct along with them. We started taking a look at what data we could get to really show us the full scope of the problem of officers kind of going between departments and bringing their misconduct along with them.
What does the public need to know and benefit from understanding the backgrounds of the police officers that are on the streets?
There's a very high bar to what's called decertification, which is when the state takes away their ability to work as a police officer. And so if they don't meet that very high bar, then there is nothing stopping them from taking that certification and moving to another department. At stake is really being able to have any kind of say over if you're a resident and you want to look at the background of an officer who your local department is hiring. None of these are really easy things to do right now in Virginia with the records laws the way they are.
Now, the state did a study and looked at some of these officers and found that there were numerous instances where police officers had been convicted of serious crimes and yet kept their certification as officers.
Yeah, in 2012, actually, the Virginia State Crime Commission looked at this issue of whether officers who had criminal convictions were keeping their certifications and heard testimony from law enforcement officials. Many officers who were known to these officials to have committed criminal acts and been convicted still maintain their state certifications.
So this reform that was brought forward in 2020, where does it stand?
Unfortunately, the state has not passed those statewide conduct standards. So even though there is draft language that exists, no officers are currently able to be decertified for things like willful excessive force.
What did you come to learn about Virginia and its oversight and regulation of officers and sheriff's deputies?
Yeah, Virginia's been an interesting case because for a long time, there was barely any state level oversight or discipline of police officers. Like I said, you had to have been convicted of a felony. And even then, there was research and reporting showing that the state wasn't even decertifying those officers who had been convicted of felonies. The new standards that were drafted in 2022, if they do go into effect and they're enforced, you could see a significant rise in the amount of officers whose certifications are suspended by the state. That's pretty dependent on the executive branch of the state and whether or not they want to implement the reforms that were passed previously. It'll be very interesting to see how seriously the state takes this going forward.
Well, it's great reporting, Sam. I really appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us, and look for the story on vcij.org and WHRO.org. Sam Stecklow of the Invisible Institute, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lou.
The last time Democrats were in control of the General Assembly, they failed to pass a bill to ban assault-style weapons. Now, as Michael Pope reports, the House and Senate have both approved a ban.
During a debate on the Senate floor, Republican Senator John McGuire of Goochland County repeatedly implied people have a God-given right to have an assault-style weapon, prompting this exchange with Senate Majority Leader Scott Surreville.
Can the senator cite to me where in the Bible it talks about AR-15s, assault rifles, or for that matter, guns?
The senator from Goochland has the floor.
It is our God-given right to protect ourselves enshrined in the Constitution. And I got to tell you, we have mental health issues we talk about in the General Assembly, but really there's a problem with an evil heart.
Senator Suhas Subramaniam is a Democrat from Loudoun County who says he worries about these weapons intimidating people in public places like a farmer's market.
We're talking a lot about rights here right now, and I just have to say that we have a right to feel safe in public places. And we have a right to feel safe in our communities. And people brandishing assault weapons does not make us feel safer. People having assault weapons on them does not make us safer in any sort of way.
The House and Senate have now both passed an assault weapons ban, which means the governor is likely to make the final determination. During his State of the Commonwealth address last month, he said Virginia already has the toughest gun laws in the nation, and he'd rather see legislation increasing penalties for people who commit crimes with guns. Reporting from the Capitol in Richmond, I'm Michael Pope.
Virginia Peninsula Community College students will soon have an easier path to transfer to Christopher Newport University. CNU's Vice President for Enrollment and Student Success, Dr. Lisa Duncan-Rains, says this takes existing relationships a step farther.
We've been working together for years, and when you spend enough time with colleagues, you tend to come up with ideas that you hope are good, and we think this is a good idea. And we're all about providing those opportunities. A formal partnership just kind of seals it, and we're committed to making this happen.
She says participating community college students will get access to a taste of life at CNU early in their college experience.
This one's a little different in that we start working with these students early, like in their first year of enrollment at Virginia Peninsula, so that we're able to provide early advising, access to our campus events, athletic events, cultural events, and so that we really get to know these students early and that we strengthen that transfer process for them and they have those resources as they go through the process.
VPCC President Tawana Porter Brannon says recruitment for the program starts even earlier.
Virginia Peninsula Community College is seeing a huge increase in the number of high school students that are taking college-level classes while still in high school. And so what we have decided to do is include our high school students in the bridge program. So they start learning about this bridge to Christopher Newport while they're in our high school dual enrollment program. And so they can start preparing for the pathway to Christopher Newport while they're still juniors and seniors in high school.
And she says there is also scholarship money and other assistance for students to bridge the big jump in tuition from the community college to Christopher Newport. The clock is ticking on the Pamunkey Indian Tribe's authorization to build its casino in Norfolk. If the tribe cannot get its casino license by November of 2025, it would have to ask city residents to vote on yet another referendum. WHRO's Ryan Murphy has more.
To get a casino license, the tribe has to invest at least $300 million into the project. And to get that far into development, it needs approval from several city boards, including Norfolk's council. But the designs for Norfolk's casino have been submitted and withdrawn from the city's architectural review board several times now. A spokesman for the tribe says they're still reworking designs based on feedback from city council. He wouldn't say what those were or how long the redesign would take. Mayor Kenny Alexander and Councilman J.P. Page, who represents the area that would include the casino, wouldn't talk about concerns council members have. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. The General Assembly legalized marijuana possession in 2021 with a proposal to begin retail sales this year. Lawmakers haven't agreed on what a marijuana marketplace should look like, so it was shelved. Now those details are being hashed out in this session. WHRO's Barry Graham caught up with Greg Habib, a former delegate who now represents the Virginia Cannabis Association, to see where the legislation stands.
Greg, tell me exactly where we're at right now with this bill, where it stands, Senate Bill 448, as proposed by Senator Rouse.
Sometimes the legislative process can be long and circuitous. So the bill has gone through the Rehabilitation Committee. It's gone through the Courts Committee. Now it's getting ready to go to the Finance Committee probably next week. And then after that, it would go to the floor of the Senate.
So this bill actually piggybacks the legalization process, which began 3 years ago. The ability to set up a legal marketplace in Virginia has been somewhat stalled. Why legalize it, then face all these hurdles and a stalling process?
Right. Yeah, well, keep in mind, at the time the General Assembly legalized it, they did pass a bill to set up an adult use market. It just had a reenactment clause on it because they couldn't get all the details done. And then between then and the next session, there was an election. Republicans took over. There was some new voices in the room, and it's gotten delayed. But it really is time to get back to it. As I tell everybody, This is not about legalization. That ship has already sailed. And it's frankly not about creating a market. We already have a market. In fact, we have a $3 billion a year market.
When you say we have a $3 billion market, that, of course, is underground. So is the state missing a extreme ability to gain revenue here through legal taxing?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. There are tens or hundreds of millions of dollars being left out there. And not only that, you think of all the societal problems created by the underground illegal market, and you really get to see that it's a no-brainer. Wherever you stand on cannabis legalization, nobody thinks we should have an illegal, unregulated market instead of a regulated, tested, licensed market.
Any idea where Governor Youngkin stands on the creation of a legal marketplace?
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to speak for the governor. He has given public quotes that this isn't a high priority for him. But we think if we can put together the right bill, the right public safety measures, the right opportunities for small businesses to access the market, the right tax revenue, we think ultimately folks are going to have a hard time opposing that legislation because of all the good it's going to do.
Can you comment on the JLARC study that notes that there is somewhat of a concern about legalization inside the African American community?
There's no question there are certain communities this is a very important issue to. We have heard from a lot of stakeholders in this process about righting historical wrongs over drug policing, about minority access to this marketplace. We are trying to take all of those issues into account, and we are trying to create a market that really welcomes everybody into it, that ensures that disadvantaged communities have an opportunity to participate, and really, again, can regulate the existing illegal market in a way that does well for all Virginia citizens.
How optimistic are you for the passage of this bill and getting a marketplace up and running by 2025?
So I'm always optimistic. I don't undertake things if I don't think we have a chance. So I'm probably biased towards the optimistic side. I think, we've gotten a bipartisan vote so far in the Senate. I think it's going to continue that way. I have every reason to think the House is going to pass their version of a bill, which is likely to lead to a bill coming out of the General Assembly. I think depending on what that bill looks like and what the vote count is will ultimately impact what the governor does. It's hard to predict what's going to happen a couple months from now, but I'm an optimistic person, and I think we have a real chance.
People struggling to make ends meet in Virginia might be about to get some help. Virginia Public Radio's Michael Pope explains why.
Democrats in Richmond are pushing a $30 million plan that could lead to hundreds of extra dollars in the pockets of struggling families the next time tax refunds arrive in the mail. It's called an Earned Income Tax Credit, and Delegate Sia Price is a Democrat from Newport News who says this is a way to help those most in need.
We can provide economic relief for families actually struggling to pay the light bill, actually struggling to pay for their groceries, and those living paycheck to paycheck.
Her bill hit a roadblock this week when a subcommittee recommended that the idea be studied until next year, although it still could be included in the House's proposed budget later this month. The Senate version of the bill was introduced by Senator Aaron Rouse, a Democrat from Virginia Beach.
The Earned Income Tax Credit is something that should matter to all of us in the Senate because it would help people in all corners of our Commonwealth, both rural and urban.
His bill will be considered by the Senate Finance Committee later this week. Reporting from the Capitol in Richmond, I'm Michael Pope.
In Virginia, there is a little fish at the center of a great big, decades-long fight. Advocates worry overfishing for Menhaden is harming the ecosystem in the Chesapeake Bay. Industry says there is no evidence of that. Scientists need more research to settle the debate, but as WHRO's Catherine Hafner reports, state lawmakers would need to foot the bill.
Quite pleasant right now.
On a breezy afternoon, Captain Chris Dollar steers his boat across the water in Gloucester, Virginia. Dollar owns a charter fishing business and has spent his whole life along the Chesapeake Bay, so he's seen a lot of Menhaden. He says they're not the most glamorous fish.
They're not, I wouldn't call them ugly, but I wouldn't call them poster children for the Chesapeake writ large.
But the Menhaden has become a kind of poster child for the Chesapeake Bay. The small, silver fish are a crucial part of the bay's ecosystem. They're a key food source for everything from ospreys to bigger fish like striped bass that local sport fishers treasure. Now, Dollar and others worry Menhaden are at risk of disappearing. He says he sees drastically fewer fish than he used to.
The density of the schools, where it might be, size of a football field, is now just maybe a tennis court. And you see those smaller and smaller numbers.
Sport fishing and conservation groups pin the blame on one company, Omega Protein. It's the last player from an industry that once spanned the East Coast, harvesting Menhaden from Maine to Florida. Virginia is the last place on the Atlantic that allows this type of fishing, which turns millions of Menhaden into fish meal and fish oil. It's been controversial for decades, but in recent years, it's become even more heated. Local fishermen sometimes post videos of Omega's boats on social media, complaining about the scale of the industry, which uses purse seines or giant nets to scoop up massive swarms of Menhaden.
Absolutely destroying what's left of the Chesapeake Bay.
Critics now want state officials to shut down Omega in the Bay, but Omega says the industry is already tightly regulated. Monty Deal is CEO of Ocean Harvesters, which runs Omega's fishing fleet.
First of all, we've been fishing here since 1878. The footprint of Menhaden fishing in the Chesapeake Bay is as low now as it's probably been in 60 or 70 years.
He shows me around the company's plant in Reedville, Virginia, and points out giant bins holding the previous day's catch.
Oh, wow.
So that's what a million Menhaden looks like.
From these bins, he says, the Menhaden move through the plant.
We use 100% of that fish. We cook the fish, we squeeze it, we press it.
The resulting fish meal and fish oil goes into products like pet food and omega-3 supplements. Deal says banning Omega from the Chesapeake Bay would force the whole plant to close, costing more than 200 local jobs. And he says critics are ignoring the data.
They're not being objective about the fishery. They don't understand the fishery, and they're not listening to the science.
That science is at the center of the debate. The overall population of Atlantic Menhaden crashed during the 20th century, but it bounced back after commercial fishing was limited. Rob Latour studies Menhaden at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science.
Quite frankly, if this were any other species, I think we'd all be celebrating.
But the available data looks at the fish's habitat along the entire East Coast. Critics worry that could obscure a decline happening specifically in the Chesapeake Bay. Latour says that could be true, but it needs to be studied.
I don't fault people for thinking about that, but it's a very complicated thing to actually determine with sufficient evidence scientifically. The things you need to know, we don't know.
Advocates want more research to close that data gap. After a year of negotiations, they hoped Virginia lawmakers would approve a new study this session. But instead, the study was tabled until at least next year.
It's a big disappointment for the bill not to go forward.
Delegate Lee Ware, a Republican from west of Richmond, sponsored the bill.
This species is so important to so many elements of the bay.
Conservation groups say Omega lobbied against the bill, though the company denies that. Dollar, the fishing captain, has been involved with conservation for 30 years. He says there's an old saying in fishery politics.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. Well, I've amended that. When it comes to Menhaden, particularly in Virginia, it's an ultra marathon, not just a marathon.
That ultramarathon continues. Advocates are already asking state regulators to halt the fishery until more is known about potential impacts. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from Steve Walsh, Catherine Hafner, Ryan Murphy, and Barry Graham, VCIJ's Lou Hansen and Stam Stecklow, and VPR's Michael Pope. Also Connor Worley, who produced today's show. A reminder, you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed, and you can get news updates at WHRV.org, the WHRO smartphone app, the WHR Reports podcast feed, online at Facebook or at X, formerly known as Twitter. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton.